Welcome everyone to the second session of the Urban School Food Alliance Procuring Local Foods mini-series. This is session 2, and we'd like to welcome Jeremy West, who is the Chief of Finance and Operations for the Urban School Food Alliance, and John Wittler, who's the Executive Director of the Ogallala Commons, who will share their experience in developing community interest in local food programs, building or strengthening community food coalitions, and helping school district operators of all sizes understand the important role that they can play in the process that will benefit their students and community. So I'll turn it over to John and Jeremy. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Jill. If you want to go ahead and advance the next slide, Lev. We're going to have excited to have John Wittler join us today. I get the privilege of actually serving on the board that John of the organization of which he's the executive director. And so you're going to learn a little bit about them and just a great example of how to get community support around local food initiatives, farm to school in our case, oftentimes. And so, but John's having some bandwidth issues, so he's probably not going to show his face on camera, but he really does look like this. I can vouch for it. This is John. So I'm going to turn it over to him to start. And welcome.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hello to everybody. I'm really bummed in this case that my camera is not working because I made sure and dress appropriately. So anyway, I apologize for that. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide. One of the core programs that our organization has and serves through is a rebuilding local food systems program, and this is the kind of the logic model that we use to shape that work. And I'm not going to talk through all of it, but I wanted to make sure it was here if any of you wanted to access it after the fact. The main thing I think for our for our purposes is on the left side of the front end is the importance of building coalitions between lots of different domains, if you will, of a community that often stay disconnected. But really important to build those coalitions in order to have a successful food system. And schools, of course, are actually, I think, one of the institutions that is most important to us in our work, due to the fact that they touch so many of the other domains, right? So it's not just education, but it is food, serving students food and staff food, but also we touch healthcare when we're in the school, all of those different pieces. So the idea that if we engage in the activities there in the second column with other members of coalition, that ultimately after a series of work, but longitudinally, what we're able to achieve is the stuff at the far right, which is to improve community health outcomes, to actually affect the economic opportunity within a region, and to increase the consumption of regionally produced foods or fresh food within a community. And certainly schools, as I said, are one of the major ways that we view doing that. And as we get going in this work in a particular region, one of the things that we often, especially in the last couple of years, all of us have had an opportunity to hear a lot about supply chain issues, right? And we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. We've really tried to kind of back away from the idea of just a supply chain, which is moving a product or creating and distributing product, but to really embrace the idea of the value chain and all of the different activities and connections within a value chain that leads to the end product. And so obviously this is just a very simplified version of a value chain, but all of these things, you know, rather than just identifying somebody to or a way to get a product from start to finish, it really honors and kind of moves the focus from the institution or the you know, from a business, and moves that focus to an end user or consumer, an ultimate, you know, in this case, someone who's eating the food. And so all of the decisions through that create a value chain and create value in different pieces of it. And really, when we look back to when we're thinking about the activities that we've got within the logic model, the way that then, you know, shows up in the value chain is in what we would refer to as value chain coordination, or what's considered value chain coordination. We can jump to the next slide there too. And value chain coordination is this idea that we have to leverage soft infrastructure at each of those connecting points within a value chain and within a community in order to really affect the food system in the end. And so most of the time, when we look at doing some sort of an intervention in a system, organizations start with an asset map, and they think about hard infrastructure, which is certainly important, but the idea of what makes interventions actually work and last are the idea of really strengthening the linkages throughout that system or throughout that chain. And so if you want to advance to the next slide, we really focus on these types of roles and services, and you know, as a school or as a nonprofit organization, and in our case, or any of the other coalition members that might have shown up there or were represented in the left side of the logic model, we're looking for a combination that provides these roles and services to the value chain writ large. So being able to, you know, to connect people, that's a major part of it. You know, often, and when we're in an institution, we speak a completely different language than somebody who's producing food or somebody that's distributing food. And certainly when we skip a linkage that is in what we would think of as a traditional supply chain, we find ourselves speaking different languages, right? And so that's why I think it's so important to get producers and mid-market aggregators directly in touch with folks from schools and institutions to bridge that gap and to create relational capital and strengthen that in order to create opportunities within that value chain. Technical assistance is, you know, really a big one, I think, that is important for departments of education, departments of agriculture, nonprofits, and districts or institutions alike to really look for and identify the operators that can provide the technical assistance that really do provide meaningful connections and meaningful skill building. I'm not going to go through each of these. Those are two that I think are really, really important. And also, when I get to the bottom right, the idea of research and assessment, and the idea that value chain coordinators provide accountability to the system, and really to both sides of the linkages that they serve. That's a really meaningful part of systems change, to make sure that we're relationally accountable and that we're financially accountable, And obviously we have a lot of regulations that we need to be accountable with as well. So I think let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here. And many of you might be familiar with this. It's adapted from the Waters of Systems Change. Don't remember exactly what year this came out. It's probably there in the fine print, but the idea was that there are 6 different elements that really hold all of our systems together, and they travel kind of in this inverted pyramid from explicit to implicit. And in order to experience systems change, then we have to create a kind of a tipping point of change within this these 6 different elements and how they interact with one another. And obviously mental models are very difficult to change, but that's when transformational change really happens. The important thing, I think, to be aware of this when we're thinking about trying to engage in farm to school as a school, or those of us that are in a nonprofit space, is that change actually can flow both directions between these things. And so if you have a really dynamic person who has a certain thinking, and they're able to through the power of their relationships and their connections to sort of exert change on the system, that's certainly possible. But often it's through our policies, practices, and resource flows that begin to change the way that the rest of this interacts, and eventually our mental models sort of shift to adapt to the other 5 elements in here. I think with that, Jeremy, I'm gonna turn it back to you. That was kind of a quick little run through. I'm happy to take any questions whenever it is that you want me to do that, Jeremy, or if there's something that you want to pull out for me to discuss.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And if you do have questions, please put those in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end as well, too. Before we advance these slides, though, I hope my district operators that are on the call here can see that really, there's a place for you in each of these as we think about managing change and really shaping those systems. Sometimes it can be a policy or a practice issue within a district that needs to be tweaked to be able to accommodate some of the needs of your local producers. Sometimes it's those relationships. I know when I was a district director, my growers and producers needed help establishing relationships with other directors besides myself, and I needed help establishing relationships with other growers for other types of products. And those power dynamics did shift. I was in charge of the menu, and here's when I want a menu XYZ, but it was also helpful to just say, okay, I know you grow this product. When's the best time that I should plan to have that on my menu, and really let them help drive that menu a little bit. So it really is something that's fluid up and down. I appreciate, John, I always learn something from you, and I appreciate you including this in your presentation. So if we'll advance to the next slide, I'm going to kind of give you, and after that one, we don't need to see me, talk about how schools can drive change. And so here's just first of all, schools are a huge economic driver. And so whether you're a large school district like our members here at Urban School Food Alliance, or maybe you're listening to this and you're a smaller district, I can guarantee that you are probably the largest food service provider in your neighborhood and in your town or your city, no matter if you're in a small town or in a large city. Because of the amount of meals and the amount of purchasing that happens. And so, first of all, schools can drive change. They are an economic driver. We know that you're buying lots, even though it's not all year round for some schools in those smaller places, but we can see here from some data that came from the USDA back in 2017-18, that's the most recent they had, but over 67,000 schools are participating. And that's 65% of our schools in the US. And this is in some type of farm to school activities. And that's engaging a huge number of students, 42.8 million, and spending $1.26 billion. Schools also help preserve natural resources by engaging in local food initiatives. So when food isn't having to leave its where it's grown and have to travel as far or travel across the country, and when food is received that is fresh because it didn't have to be picked so far in advance, it lasts longer, so there's less food waste, and so that's better for our environment and our natural resources. And of course, it's beginning to create lifelong impacts on students as they get introduced to foods and that maybe they don't have access to at home or just haven't experienced, as they begin to understand what makes up a healthy meal by coming through the lunchroom. This really impacts the health and wellness of our children. And so for USFA, it's important. This is in one of our statements in a procurement document that we talked about, our procurement best practices, that procuring food from local sources is a powerful way for school food authorities to leverage their collective voice to transform school food and our broader food system. And we believe that wholeheartedly, that our communities love it. They love to see that their local school districts and other institutional buyers are investing back into those communities. Let's advance to the next slide. So how do you get connected to your local food shed or the local food system? Some of you are probably a ways down the road here. So if you've had some things that worked, pop those in the chat. Here's some things that I did as a director or things that I had thought of. First of all, you need to turn to your peers. And so that could be other institutional buyers. Maybe there's no school districts in your neighborhood, your part of the world, that are doing a strong farm to school program. And so, but there might be a hospital that is, or a higher ed facility. And so reach out to them, figure out, well, what are their connections? Who are they buying from? Where are they going for their local foods? Also trade associations, whether it's related to school or maybe there's a produce association that's in your state. Get connected with those folks, understand their resources and rely on them to help find those growers and producers that want to sell to your district. Farmers and farmers markets. I've actually made some connections just by going to my local community farmer market and walking around, buying stuff for my own family, but also getting to know those growers and producers that were around my community. And so that I could ask them if they were interested in selling to schools and being able to talk about the program and what we were trying to do. Local restaurants, a lot of them are dialed in. They are buying some things and featuring them on their menu. So if you see that, oftentimes they'll put the farm name right on the menu. So that's pretty easy. But if not, talk to some of your local restaurant groups or go to some local restaurants that you're impressed with their menu and just find out from them who they're buying from. I think local food coalitions and networks, there's a lot of things that are happening out there, and sometimes we just don't know about because we're in the school food world and we're not necessarily paying attention to what other groups are doing to buy local food. And so getting to understand what's in your neighborhood, again, creating those connections and building upon the soft skills that are already existing in your community. When I arrived at Greeley, actually, it was our county health department that was a huge help to my district. They wanted to provide funding so that we could hold convenings with districts who wanted to buy and producers and farmers that wanted to sell us things, because those conversations had not happened in that region of Colorado. And so they were also a good resource for us to understand who the major players were, because they were connected with them. Also, each state, some have really robust farm to school programs across their state. Check those out. Sometimes they have those mapping where you can type in a zip code and figure out what farms are near you. And also the USDA and our state farm to school also have some great resources. Next slide. And then after you've found out who you're going to buy from and you want to continue to develop those connections, I want to back up just a little bit. And to John's point, I've been at several of those regional convenings that Ogallala Commons has hosted, and it is really neat to see gathering in folks from all aspects of the food shed system. So you've got those that are serving elderly populations. You've got the school food people there. You have people that own a small processing plant for beef. You've got those that are doing commercial gardening. And other nonprofit organizations in the community. And as you go around the room, you're finding out that sometimes people, even in their own community, even a smaller community, don't always know what everybody else is doing. And so they're making connections internally. That's also helping them to scale up to be able to do more things regionally. So as schools, here's kind of what they need from you. Get a plan. So project and then purchase what you project, right? So this is an example from one of our districts when they held a convening, and they put out there, and this is just a small snippet, this is several pages of a document of here's what we want, here's the specification we're looking for, here's how many cases we would like to have per month and how often we'd like to have it delivered. And so that growers and producers understand from the get-go if this is going to be a situation that they can support. Now, sometimes this can scare off some of the smaller groups if you're a large farm. So really, let them know that you're looking to get what you can from them, and understanding that as a large urban district, they're probably not going to be able to supply all of your schools. And I just gave an example from when I was in Greeley here in Colorado but the year before I got there as a director, they had bought one crop, and this was back in the day a little bit. Farm to School is very new in Colorado, and it was a crop of cherry tomatoes. They spent $239. And so you can see we began to grow that. There was a big drop off one year when we had some weather and some pest issues over on the western slope where a lot of our fruit is grown. And so you see that dropped off. And so we've continued to grow that. And now I understand some of the districts I'm talking to today, this is less than a day's worth of produce buy. But for us, a district that was about 20,000 students at the time, it was significant to get to $100,000 of fresh produce. So have your project what you're going to purchase and then actually purchase it. And that's really going to help solidify the relationship for years to come. Our next slide. Another thing that districts can really help their communities by providing resources. You're kind of the authority on this whole institutional buying. You do it a lot. You're the ones that understand the procurement process. And I can tell you that is a hard process to teach to those that's not the world they live in. So some of the things I've seen done, actually Ogallala Commons produced a producer toolkit that was just specific to where I live now, which is Southeast Colorado. And so it talks about what do we grow down here? What's in season? When is our season in Southeast Colorado? And so that's helpful to have those tools. So think about that maybe for your community. What, help them understand when is it that you're serving the most meals, and that you do serve meals in the summer. It's not that you don't need any food in the summer, you just may need a lesser volume of it. A lot of districts offer a shared use agreement. So there's an example of one where they can rent out the kitchen. And so that's another way to help support local food initiatives, is when your kitchens are not in use, is being able to rent that out so that others can process, meaning maybe it's just wash and chop. Maybe they're making a product. I found this to be useful in my own district and generating some revenue. It wasn't a huge revenue generator, but it would generate some revenue for the department, but also provide sometimes new avenues for me to purchase products from. You're great at training. Districts are great at training, and you have access to training that farmers and growers will have no idea about procurement training and serve safe and food safety training. You often get notified about grants, so share that with them. If you want to include them in a grant, be willing to help them tell their story, because sometimes they do a lot of great work, but they're not great at telling their story. And like we talked about, you have the facilities. So offering the use for that during harvest or for putting up things can be a big benefit and really help to grow your program. Next slide. On the role of schools, it's really communication. Boston held a great event a couple of years ago that I got to be a part of called Local Roots. And they had about 40 farmers, I think, show up to that and really get to hear what the vision was for that district and understand how they could get connected with that. Now, just know that these regional convenings, it takes some time. That's not going to be your instant win sometimes. Sometimes it will. But just plan to have those conversations frequently and to have those events that you can really communicate what your vision is and include these your growers and producers. You see an example of San Diego promoting some of their produce and farms on their social media. Look, a lot of districts have access to a comms team, or you may have a whole communications person within your department. I don't know a lot of farmers that have that. So that's a great resource if you can help with that. And then you can see down here, Cafe LA out of Los Angeles, where they have branded their program, and they are working to highlight all the different types of fresh produce that they're going to offer through the school year. All right, next slide. That's what I have, but I want to open it up for question. I know there's been some things going back and forth in the chat. I want to give John a chance to respond to anything, or
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great. I did just put a couple of things in the chat as you were going. That just kind of went with that, or responded to responded to Dr. Wilson's question a little bit as to what some of those events look like.
Yeah, I appreciate, John, your comments about how sometimes our growers and producers, it's really an intimidation factor to think about selling to a school district and just the quantity that they need. And so, you know, helping them overcome those perceived hurdles is really important. And just, I appreciate our members. You play an important role in communities, and you really have an opportunity to help drive the food system that you want to see for your community, just because of your purchasing power, your heart for offering healthy meals, and the need to meet regulations, right? And so I know that our members and others that will be listening to this, no matter the size of your community, you really have an important role to play, and we appreciate what you're doing to drive those food systems in your community.
Yeah, and I would just add to that intimidation conversation that it is interesting as we work with kind of both sides of this equation that we often see what intimidates producers is not at all intimidating to school districts, of course. It's the world they live in. And the same is also true. The things that are intimidating school districts are the things that producers are like, well, that's the easy thing. That doesn't bother me at all. And so I think that that's the, it's just important to remember that you get over that by having those conversations.
Thank you, John. We have a question, a couple examples of an outcome of your work, and what was one of the success stories? I think for me, ours was from a very small regional convening. We were able to, I really got a farmer that became a champion for us and worked with us kind of that first year. And he was one of the few because it was pretty new, but it then became myself and that person that went around, and he was able to open doors for me to, it was hard sometimes to even get people to want to meet from, you know, who's this Jeremy West from District 6? I don't know who that is, but because of his connections in the community that he had kind of grown up in and knew people, we were able to get those doors open, get people to have those conversations or come to events. And that individual farmer, he really helped me be able to grow our program exponentially. That it would have taken us longer to do that. And so that was very helpful. And it resulted in more produce on the plate that was local.
Yeah, I would say two different things. One was a producer producing greens, and they just had really assumed that an institutional market would never be open to them. It was, again, perceived hurdles and intimidation. And after being aware of one of the tours, their place wasn't featured on our tour, but participating there and then getting into some of the events, they were able to, from the producer side, then access two different school districts. You know, none of them as big as your standard membership, Jeremy, but you know, Pueblo, Colorado is not too small of a district. At least in the state of Colorado, it's would be fairly small for your membership, but they now not only are providing, you know, week-to-week deliveries there during the school year, but for the summer lunch program, they've found that to be a lot more stable than they ever imagined. So that was one. Another is that, you know, we work with a lot of protein producers, and a lot of times the cattle producers, they are able to move their higher priced, higher value cuts to restaurants and direct to consumer, and they get stuck with just thousands and thousands of pounds of ground beef that they can't move. And we've got one that we're working with right now that, you know, he's got to a place where he's sitting on almost 60,000 pounds of ground beef that that he was needing to get moved, and is going to be able to move that through a school district, it would seem. And he's just ecstatic about it, because for him, it's not what he's trying to make his money off of, but he needs the space back, and he needs to get something for that product. So those would just be a couple of examples of, for both of them, on the producer side, they assumed that they would never be able to sell to an institution, but they're both finding a really stable outlet for produce that they needed to move.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Well, this is the second of 4, I believe, of the mini series. So we're thankful that you have joined us today. These will be posted so that you can view them later or share them with your team or a colleague as well. And so we look forward to seeing you on our procurement mini series for the next installment next week. And thanks for your time today. And thank you, John, for joining us.